Good morning, everybody. Hello, it's Peter Russell here from Oxlep. I'm just wanted to welcome the people that have joined us so promptly. We are expecting more people, so I am going to invite you to just wait a little bit, and we'll start the presentation, start the webinar properly in a couple of minutes' time. But thank you for joining us on time, and look forward to working with you this morning. Now, because we're using GoToWebinar this morning, which is mainly designed for, as the name suggests, broadcasting webinars. So if you're familiar with Zoom or indeed Microsoft Meet, Google Meet or Office, this is slightly less interactive, but we will be encouraging you to participate in the webinar a little bit later on. Still, attendees are still joining us. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we crack on because we haven't got a massive amount of time this morning, and we've got quite a lot of ground to cover. I think other people will join us throughout the session, so we'll invite them in as and when we get going. So welcome again to what is the third in a series of innovation briefings that we at Oxlep Business are putting on for our clients and our new clients. So there's some people joining who are already been to a couple of briefings. Welcome back. And then there's some people joining who haven't been to a briefing before. The way this session works is that, roughly speaking, I'll cover the topic that I want to put some ideas across to you and share some knowledge and some thinking for roughly half an hour. I will then invite a bit of an added bonus today. I have a colleague of mine, a friend and colleague, Charles King, who runs his own company, a company called WizDish, and he also is the entrepreneur in residence for Oxford Brookes University, particularly focusing, I think, on STEM sort of topics. So he's got huge experience of the topic today, collaborating, innovation through collaboration. And I'll invite Charles to contribute to the session a little bit later on. I'm also joined by Georgia, who's kind of in the background and will help us if there's any issues with tech, hopefully. And we'll also keep an eye on the questions and chat. Now, what I would like you to do is you should see a control panel, and down towards the bottom of the control panel, you either got a questions box or a chat box, and we'd like you to use the chat box to post any questions or comments or thoughts that arise during the session. What we'll do after we've heard from Charles, I'll wrap up the main part of the session, and the last 10-15 minutes hopefully will be over to you in terms of us answering your questions and you making any comments. Now, at that point, we invite you to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. I think within this particular platform, I won't be able to see you. So you're lucky enough to see me and Charles, but I think that's going to be it for this morning. But please do contribute as you can through the chat box and use that box. We've got about 13, 14 people already on the webinar this morning. I think we had a couple more booked in, and I'll also be joined by some colleagues later on, so you may be able to answer questions about the program in general. Now, just as a bit of context, the aim of these sessions is mainly awareness raising. So we're going to skim over the topic a little bit. What we're really seeking to do is to through the briefings, is to connect you with Oxfordshire's amazingly rich sort of innovation ecosystem. And what we really like to be moving towards doing is building the community of clients amongst the ISFP programme, and putting you in touch with each other as well as with the sort of institutions that we'll be talking about today. The first two briefings that we did were mainly on the subject of funding, where to find funds for innovation, and how to write a successful application. Now, that content is still available to you through either my slides, backed up by a conversation with me if you want, a one-to-one, and also through some recordings which we're going to make available. Today, though, we're looking about innovating through collaboration, and in particular, how to make collaborations more successful. So, as I said, it'll be roughly 30 minutes from me, a little bit of a contribution from Charles, and then we'll move over to the chat. So please do use that chat box. I'll aim to wrap up the whole session at 11 o'clock as per plan, so those of you that have to leave are welcome to do so, obviously, at that point. But if the discussion is carrying on, then I'm more than happy to stick around for another 20 minutes or half an hour or so. We'll probably switch off the recording at that point. Oh, by the way, this session is being recorded, so that we can share it with other people in the future. So 11 o'clock we'll close, and then we'll wrap up the session, and you'll be invited to stay if you want to, or leave if you want to. So let's dive straight into the topic of how to innovate through collaboration. And what I want to cover today is pretty straightforward. It's the why. Why should you collaborate? What are the benefits that you and your potential partners can seek to get out of a collaboration which is about innovating? Who could you collaborate with? What could you collaborate on? And how could you collaborate more effectively? So, yeah, very simply, it's a bit of a what, why, when, how, who, etc., etc. What we're going to try and cover, as well as what makes a collaboration more successful, is kind of the reverse of that. Like, what could make a collaboration struggle? So what are the potential pitfalls in setting up and then delivering or carrying on with a collaboration? And we're also going to have a couple of quick mentions of some schemes that can help with the collaboration process. There are many, too many to go into today, and future briefings, I think, will focus on some of these mechanisms, so you can get into more detail about those in the future. And indeed, half of the challenge is finding the right mechanism to support the collaboration that you want to do. We'll also talk a little bit about a couple of examples, just to bring them alive, and I'll invite Charles at that point to talk about some of the collaborations he's been involved with, which are many and varied. So let's move on straight away to the why. Now, the why would you collaborate? Why would you bother? Why don't you just go it alone? It's a lot simpler, perhaps. You're masters of your own destiny. You may be trying to bring a new product or technology or service to market. You know, doing it yourself is obviously what many of you will be experienced in doing. But why should you think about a collaboration? Now, a few little words of context. I mean, I'll leave this slide up and I won't run through verbatim because I think you can read it for yourself. This is some of the benefits which I think you can look to obtain from the perspective of the SME, from the small and medium-sized enterprise, from the company. Now, on the call today, we do actually have a mixture. We have some people from Oxford University and other institutions, but mainly our focus this morning is on the perspective of the company, and particularly the smaller, more modest sized company who might be interested in a collaboration. There are obviously lots of people who you could collaborate with, but the other little bit of context this morning is that we're going to be looking at collaborations between SMEs and what people like Charles and me call the knowledge base. So it's the institutions, the organizations, the initiatives and the bodies that are involved with research and development, not purely science-based, but technology-based, perhaps. There's innovation that happens in humanities, etc., but there's a little bit of a focus on technology and innovation from that perspective. And the knowledge base around Oxfordshire, as we'll see, is particularly rich. Now, at other sessions, we may indeed look at other forms of collaboration, such as open innovation, which happens quite often between larger organisations and smaller organisations, which can provide solutions. But for today, it's about how to collaborate with the knowledge base. And hopefully you've had a chance to look through that slide now about the potential benefits of setting up one of these collaborations. Fundamentally, for me, it's about getting things done and innovating more successfully and efficiently and effectively, so more powerfully. So if we define innovation as the process of bringing a new product or service successfully to market, I know that's only one definition, but it's the one that we're using this morning, then it's how can you collaborate to do that more successfully? And I would say that there are advantages in working with one of these institutions. If you've got any questions about any of those benefits, then we'll come back to them to how you achieve those benefits. Hopefully that will become clearer during the session, and we can always come back to it. But as you can see, there's quite a wide range of potential for benefiting from a collaboration. Now, just want to move on to who. Now, I said that Oxfordshire has a particularly rich innovation ecosystem. And so rather than more words and what would be a very long list, I've tried to show you here a few organisations that are pretty well known within the knowledge base within Oxfordshire. So you've got both universities represented there. You've got the science campus at Harwell represented by the Diamond Synchrotron in the top right-hand corner. Not so many of you may be aware of the organisations that are represented by the bottom right-hand corner. That's actually the Howbury Park Innovation Centre and Research Park in Wallingford, which has really grown from Hydraulic Research Institute, which was there to begin with, was a public sector research institute in the 60s, I think, alongside lots of other ones, and has grown since then, and has become a focus for ecology, hydrology, and environmental technologies, sciences, and companies. And there's as well as HR Wallingford, you've got the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So there's a huge amount of expertise there. There's also some fantastic resources. I'm not saying that many of you would probably want to do a sort of large-scale simulation of a river estuary or a tidal flow, but there are significant resources there and expertise for you to access. The one in the middle is slightly different. I've not actually been there, which is a symptom, I think, of the times that we live in at the moment. But I think it's the Innovation Centre, or one of the main buildings on the Silverstone Technology Park. So, you know, that's perhaps like a little bit less well known to you, but is obviously, if you're in engineering or motorsport, the resources available to you from places like initiatives like that are worth investigating in the context of collaboration. Here's another way of looking at the innovation ecosystem. So again, we're talking about who could you collaborate with, and because it is so rich and complex, people have tried to map it, and they do this fairly sort of periodically or fairly frequently. It's quite a difficult thing to do, but obviously it's something which Oxley takes quite seriously and is reflected in our economic development strategies, such as the innovation strategy and the local industrial strategy. And this is an attempt to map some of the resources available. But what I think these mapping exercises tend to do, they give people like me a tool through which I can help introduce you to these centres of expertise, but they also do hide a bit of complexity. If you just went to Harwell, for example, there's a huge amount of expertise and little centres of expertise, such as cryogenics, for example, in Harwell, where it's difficult for you to find. It's understandable that you might find that challenge rather too big, and you might be interested in a collaboration, but it's just too much hard work. And it is, I admit, a difficult ecosystem to navigate. But luckily for you, that's part of my role and part of, to some extent, Charles's role, and other people that we'll talk about are around to help with the collaboration. So that's who can you collaborate with. Now, don't forget, please do use the chat box or the questions box to post any comments or questions that you've got. My colleague Georgia will bring those to my attention if I fail to spot it. So I'm just running through these slides. So let's think again, before we go on to the how do you collaborate? I want you to think a little bit more deeply about why, but from the perspective of your potential collaborator. And this is really important. So here is another list. I'm sorry, I'll let you run through the list. But here's another list of benefits that could potentially flow towards the knowledge-based institution. So RTO stands for Research and Technology Organisation, HEI, Higher Education Institute. So these are the Harwells, the Brookes, the other university, Bedbrook Science Park, and all the organisations there. Why would they be interested in collaborating with you? And this is something which you have to think about really carefully and spend some time researching. You have to, any negotiation, any collaboration is like a negotiation, I would venture to suggest. And to have any chance of success, you really have to make an effort to understand the other party's perspective. Now, you may have obviously more than one organisation involved in your collaboration, but let's just focus on the perspective of an HEI. What are they looking for? What would they like to get out of collaboration? Why would they bother to collaborate with you, particularly if the reality is that you have limited resources to bring? Now, if you had very deep pockets and you're a major corporation, then obviously you could pay for some of these benefits, some of the benefits we talked about before, to achieve and unlock those. But the reality is probably that you're not in a position to do that. So you have to present something to them which stimulates their interest. And these are some ideas about what they are looking for or might be looking for in a collaboration. One of the more obvious one is that you are probably closer to the market than they are. So you have access to customers, you have knowledge of industry activities and market opportunities. You have an understanding of the way customers behave or people behave and are likely or not to buy something, for example. That's a kind of deep level understanding which they find difficult to access. So that's some benefit that you could bring to one of these partnerships. Why would they be interested in that? Well, it might help with their research. It might help with something they're deeply interested in. It might help them validate, present an opportunity to test some of the work and the theories that they've been working on. So in other words, push forward and extend the boundaries of their research. One other quick one to mention is that anybody involved in research is probably being put under some pressure these days to think about the impact of that research. What's the point of that research? If it's clearly aimed at solving a problem, how do you bring that problem forward? How do you commercialize or make that available to the community it's targeted at? Now, if you can help with that process, that's obviously something of clear interest to these institutions. So think carefully about why anybody would be bothered to collaborate with you. What can you offer them, as well as what you can get out of it, obviously. Now, this slide is about, I was thinking about all the different types of collaboration, and we could come up with a much longer list. I've just tried to put some of the opportunities of how you might collaborate in practice. We've looked at who you could collaborate with, and we've looked at why you should be bothered to even think about a collaboration for innovation. And I'll let you look at that slide. You'll see there is a range of different things, ways that you can work with a research institute or a university, for example. I actually call this a bit of a collaboration continuum. And the reason I call it a continuum is because you can organize these different types of collaborations in order of a number of different criteria. So you can create a continuum which reflects, for example, the time it takes on your part and on their part, the time it takes that you have to invest in this collaboration, the time it takes actually to deliver, to pan out. So if you're doing, for example, if you're sponsoring a PhD, well, that's obviously going to take a few years. If you've got a short-term problem that requires solving, well, maybe that's more suitable to a short-term contract research problem exercise. So the time it takes to deliver. Another thing on the continuum, sorry, is the extent of confidential information which is exchanged. Obviously, if you're just joining a club or a network which is organized by the institution, you don't have to exchange any confidential information at all. But if you're going down to the bottom right-hand corner and considering a joint venture, there will be a lot of information exchanged. Similarly, the extent with it that intellectual property is either created or exchanged is one of the things that affects where you are on this continuum. So what I wanted to, the lesson really for you guys is, if you're thinking of collaborating, just how much do you want to invest in it? Obviously, you've got to have some clear objectives, and we'll talk about that. But how far along this continuum do you want to go? The degree of complexity that you get involved with is affected by your choices, but also kind of what they're interested in and would like to get you involved with. You may argue that top left-hand corner level of involvement is going to have a modest return on investment. It's only going to have a modest impact on you. Bottom right-hand corner, or something in between, is going to have greater impact, more likely to be of a strategic sort of benefit to you. Well, that's another way of looking at the different types of collaboration along that continuum. And that will be reflected in your objectives. Here's another way to look at that continuum. Actually, this is using, you'll see similar sorts of things in terms of the words used, but the words are a little bit more geared up for how a university would describe these potential collaborations. Importantly on this one, and this slide actually comes from a university colleague from Oxford, and they think about things in terms of IP. So where is the intellectual property in the relationship and in the project? And they organize these potential collaborations and interactions according to the role of the position of IP within them. And clearly, if you're involving creation or exchange of IP, then it's a slightly deeper level involvement as far as the institution is concerned, and will probably take you into the institution's systems, procedures, and to some extent bureaucracy. So when you are thinking about a collaboration, think about where the IP either currently sits or is going to reside in the future. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But also get yourselves thinking about the way that the target partner, the institution you're looking at, what terms they use for these kinds of collaborations. In terms of language, I just listed here what I call some potential collaboration or typical collaboration topics. For me, this is more like business language. This is the sort of thing that you might be able to simply get done or collaborate on getting done and work with an institution to get some outputs and results. Again, I won't run through the list. I'll let you read those now. But we'll give some examples of some types of collaborations that have involved projects like this. One of the most obvious ones, I think, is obviously design and technology work. So that's working with engineers, with scientists perhaps as well, to solve technical problems. Might be a choice of materials, might be understanding why something is failing. So that's on the sort of hard technology side, but lots of collaborations take place more about market opportunities. So you can work with an institution to research the market more effectively, to understand why people behave that they do, etc., etc. But clearly, one of the things that working with an institution gives you is an opportunity to get ahead of the competition, get ahead of your competition, to use their forward look, their thinking about the future to benefit what you're doing now and in the future. It gives you a little bit of, I would argue that a collaboration in that sense can give you quite a significant competitive edge. So I want to move on to a couple of examples, and then in a few minutes I'll invite my colleague Charles to have a chat to us about some work that he does at Brooks. But a couple of examples first from me. The first one is another excuse I've got to show a nice picture. So that's Blenheim. And I worked quite extensively a couple of years ago on a collaboration between Blenheim and Oxford Brooks. Now, Blenheim obviously is a reasonably large organisation, technically probably still an SME, but obviously a sizable one. And I'm talking about the organisation that runs the Blenheim facility rather than the family. Now, what they wanted was to understand the economic impact of all of their operations. And they wanted to do that for kind of selfish reasons, really. It helps with planning, it helps with gaining commitment from local stakeholders. And, you know, there's a number of benefits that Blenheim were looking to get out of that collaboration. But they don't have the expertise, and why would they, in economic impact assessment. So they basically contracted with Oxford Brooks, and it was through the School of Business, to do an economic impact assessment. But I wanted to include it here. It wasn't just contract research or contract economic analysis. It was more of a collaboration because both parties learnt a lot on how to do this kind of work. Brooks benefited from developing their models, which then they could offer to other sort of heritage-based partners or potential customers, if you like. And Blenheim probably got a reasonably good deal and an ongoing relationship with an institution which is able to give them some validity, some underpinning academic rigor into some claims that they were making about their economic impact. And that's an ongoing relationship, which is still carrying on, still successful. So that's Blenheim, and that collaboration was about economic assessment. Let me have a look at one more. Bear with me, sorry. This is the other end of the scale in terms of size. This is a small organisation being formed a few years ago by some clever people that didn't actually kind of spin out of Oxford University, but had a relationship with Oxford University, called Ecosync. It's an Oxlep client, and we've helped them through the innovation program, as have a number of other local agencies. Now, Ecosync are all about, their strapline is stop heating empty rooms. So it's intelligent building systems to control energy usage, or to monitor and control energy usage within buildings, particularly buildings which have low occupancy. Now, Ecosync had a very clear market opportunity and are doing quite well in taking that forward, but had some challenges over the design of sensors which are embedded in their systems, their technology. So they collaborated with the university, the Department of Engineering, I think, to help with the design of those sensors. Again, you might think that, is that just contract research? Is that just a consultancy job? Well, yes and no, because the relationship is ongoing. There's involvement with the Department of Engineering on the strategic side of where Ecosync going, and continued involvement in the development of the business. So there's two examples there, and I could list many more. The innovation program is continuing to cover, the Oxlep's innovation program is continuing to help encourage and facilitate these kind of collaborations. And towards the end of this session, I'll tell you about how we can help if you are interested in pursuing one. Just before I invite Charles to contribute, there's one more slide from me, which is a little bit more on the how, which is, there are a number of, I said, mechanisms that you can use, and we can help you use, to either fund or promote or organize these collaborations. And we will look at some of these in future innovation briefings. In particular, I think the next briefing we might try and organize around something called knowledge transfer partnerships, which is the second one down. And we've facilitated a couple of those already through our ISFB program, and the institutions are very interested in more of those. And these days they can be on management topics as well as technology topics. So we'll come back to those. I'm not going to go into them in much detail today, in any more detail today. So that's something for future briefings. Charles, can I invite you to get involved now and talk a little bit about, well, do you want to reintroduce yourself in case people have forgotten, but also some collaborations you've been involved with?
Yeah, no, very much so. Hello to everybody. My name is Charles King. I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Brooks University, Oxford Brooks University, and one of about 40 odd of us who are funded by the Royal Society. So the Royal Society, some 3 years ago now, they've been running industrial fellowships for many, many years. there was a decision made that, and I think government has reached the same stage as well, is that the return on investment from the university base was not as good as it might be. There are billions going in and only a relatively small amount coming out. And why is that? What was the challenge? And one of the ways to find that out was to find people such as myself who are essentially industry based and place us in the university base and assist with spinning out and with starting up and just understanding about what the ecosystem is and where some of the challenges lie. So quite a lot of help actually. That's the intention of these EIR placements, but also a certain amount of being molded to find out a little bit about how the system actually works from the inside. But as I'm funded by the Royal Society, I'm not actually funded by the university, and therefore that's a great help in terms of working. Now, why Oxford Brookes University for me? Well, I have, when I think about it, 3 separate interfaces with Oxford Brookes over the period of time. And actually, just before I get onto that, Peter asked the question, what is it that you bring? If you come from a commercial background and you're interested in doing something with a university or a research-based organization, research technology organization, then typically the reason you want to do that is because you have a need. And I can tell you there's nothing quite like exciting the guys in the research spaces if you go along and say, I'd like to be able to do this, because they see it as a problem. And it's a problem they may well have the expertise to solve. And that just brings me to the next thing in the kind of research that you can do now really, really easily from your desktop, which is to go to the EPSRC website, that's or the ESRC website. So these are the Engineering Physical Sciences websites, or the Economic and Social Research websites, or the Medical Research websites, whatever your need may be, and find out who is doing what, because it's government money which is going into there. They publish who gets the money and who's doing the research. So you can relatively quickly find out where the expertise lies. I've done quite a lot of work with Rolls-Royce over the years, and it's only really Rolls-Royce I've come across who has the ability to go into a university and make that university experts in what Rolls-Royce needs. Most others have to go in and find who already has the expertise and go and find it. But unless you have Rolls-Royce money behind you and so forth, and then you'll be like I have been on the 3 different occasions, which is to look for where the expertise lies. So my first interaction with Oxford Brookes was when I was working with Siemens Magnet Technology, what was Oxford Magnet Technology. They'd given me a project which was likely to blow up, and therefore they wanted somebody to blame, and a consultant going in was a good one to do so. So this was a new way of making magnets. And I needed someone to do some testing quickly at cryogenics, and I just looked around. There was Oxford University and Oxford Brookes University were close at hand. I happened to know somebody through networking who was in the engineering group at Oxford Brookes. I had a word with them, and they had, so it's down to people. So it's another thing about these organizations that Peter's been talking about through here, the RTOs, and so that's whether it's the university-based, Harwell, Cullen, any of these sites. It's down to people. The sites may have a generally world-renowned status, but technology delivery is done by people. So it's finding the right person you can work with, and you may not hit that person the first time you make an entrance, but try again, because somebody in there will be enthused by what you want to do. So I happen to know somebody in Oxford Brookes, and we did some cryogenic testing, tearing things apart on a small scale before we put I don't know, it must have been around about £100,000 worth of equipment into the same type of environment. So that was my first interaction with them, and then second to that, I was working down on the site in Abingdon at MEPC down there, the big technology site with a company I helped spin out from Porton Down called P2I, and as I was leaving them, I almost immediately joined a little company called YASA. It had only just spun out from Oxford at that point. And I was on a visit there, and we were looking at something that they were doing, and I said, well, you really need to test that. And they didn't have the capital equipment. Despite coming out from Oxford, of course, that they're now a standalone company. Much like, you know, if you're coming from the SME base, then you'll be a standalone company. You don't necessarily have easy access back into the university from which you might have come. And if you didn't come from a university base, then that can present even bigger challenges. So I looked around for what YASA needed at that point, which was how to stick things together and measure it. And that relates back to one of the images that Peter put up, which was, if you want access to capital equipment, if you don't happen to have a scanning electron microscope to hand in your desk drawer, then you're really going to need to go to somebody who has that. And universities do, and you can get access to that, but you need a relationship with them. And those can, if you can find the right character, and this was luck, I think, on my part. I would have gone back in on several other occasions to find where I could. I needed somebody with adhesion and joining technology. And I would have gone anywhere in the UK to find the expertise, and it just happened that they were on my doorstep. But if they were not on my doorstep, then I would have gone to the expertise. There is no point in going to university and asking them to do something which is not already. You don't have the time to teach them everything you know for them to tell you something new. Often, that's often the way. So it's worthwhile working with the experts who are already expertise, and then you can draw on that, and they can learn from you, and it's a really fruitful relationship. And that's what we did with YASA. So I found a wonderful guy called James Broughton, a really good friend and a lovely guy, and told him about the challenge I had, which was an almost immediate solution to a problem. And how could we do this? And sometimes universities are seen as relatively slow, but there are ways. There are ways in which you can move quickly. So within a month, we were doing work. We had a student working on it, and it was done on a consultancy basis initially. And then out of that grew this thing, which I really advise you to get back to Peter about, which is the knowledge transfer partnership. So we set one of these up between YASA and Oxford Brookes. It was back in 2014 we did this. We got it was the best of the best KTPs for that year. So we went up to London to receive a prize for that from Innovate, or was it called TSB at the time? I'm not entirely sure what name it was going under at the time, but nevertheless. That was a really fruitful relationship. The associate, the student who was working on that, became a really good employee of YASA. He subsequently moved on from there, but he worked for them for a number of years. Really fruitful. And subsequent to that, YASA has taken on students, I think, almost every year to work as interns. So that was a really fruitful relationship. We needed to negotiate a collaboration agreement. Peter and I can help you sort your way through those. They do not have to be onerous. They can be mutually beneficial. So that's of course the ideal. And then my own little company, I'm one of the 5.5 million companies in the UK which are micro. Many of those are, of course, sole traders, but I'm one of the ones which have got about 3 or 4 people in it. We now have 5 in our little company, but we're still a micro. We've shipped to 33 countries, so we're a rather strange little beast. again, university, I already had contacts there. And once you've got the relationship, you can do some amazing work and get stuff done because it's fun. And it doesn't have to be only with the technology side of things. And I'm happy to have done quite a lot of work with TDE, with the Technology Design and Environment faculty. And then within that, the School of Engineering, Computing and Mathematics. But I've had really quite strong relationships as well with people in the arts faculty. And there are reasons for doing that, because some of the marketing or some of the I've needed drawing expertise, or I've needed people with expertise in neurolinguistics, or whatever it might be. Those people don't find in the technology, but you can find these resources. Once you get into the university base, you can find your way around. So it is a really valuable thing to do. And I've had, and sometimes it can be just consultancy you want. So you just pay for some work. And most of the universities are set up to do that. Again, you need to find the expert you need.
Thank you, Charles. That's brilliant. I mean, Charles mentioned quite a few things there, which I'll try and come back to. But obviously got a huge amount of experience, and thank you, Charles, for being quite positive, because I think, you know, when companies embark on trying to set up one of these collaborations, quite often it can be a bit daunting, and if you get a few initial what feels like rejections, then it's quite easy not to bother. But I think Charles shows there that it is worth pursuing. Now, what if it's okay with you, Charles, I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of slides to conclude, and then I would really like to get, we've got a couple of questions cropping up on the chat box. Thank you to Georgia for bringing those to my attention. Just before I moved on, the website that you mentioned, Charles, I think one of the ones you mentioned was the EPSRC site, was it? Or
that's right, yeah. So EPSRC publishes each year who got the research grants.
Right.
So there's a lot of money pushed out, and they tend to go back to the people who are experts in those particular fields. So figure out what your core competence is. That can be an interesting exercise in its own right. Just figure out what your core competence is and the area you actually have a need in, and then find one of these research centers that they all have to publish who they gave their money to.
Yeah. Okay, and there are some links on the slide which I think is still showing, which if you follow those through and do a bit of homework, and we can help with this, I can help with this, then you will find either that the institution is promoting some of this, some of these resources and opportunities, or indeed the host body like the EPSRC or the other research councils promote those schemes as well. And you find people in the institutions which have got good understanding of how to do these things. And as Charles said, I think KTP is something that we will organise a session on fairly quickly. So just please keep posting those questions in the chat box, because it'd be nice to get a bit of chat and hear from you guys, although it's a little bit clunky with this platform. So I'll just move on. Last couple of slides. So where do you start? Charles has given you some clues, and I'll go over a few of those. I think firstly, it's about getting yourselves organized. So refresh your description of yourself, because you're going to need that, and really think carefully about what you potentially would like to get out of any relationship. Then do your homework. Start looking at organizations that you think might be suitable. And, you know, there are lots of databases and ways to find where these centers of expertise is. It is a bit of desk work, but desk and telephone work can lead you towards the best potential collaboration targets. And as Charles said, that, you know, obviously Oxlep is interested in promoting ones in Oxfordshire, but they don't have to be. Then I've indicated, think deeply about what's in it for them as well as what's in it for you. Now, I've been working with Oxford recently, as well as Brooks, and they say that what they need is for people to have very clear objectives and, if possible, a very clear research question, if that's their terminology. So I can help formulate those. I can also help with this bit that's highlighted here, and Charles mentioned, there are people around who can help. So rather than just going straight to the research centres or to the professors or you know, the particular academics, you can do that if you're lucky. And there are people around that can help with setting up these collaborations and investigating the potential for them. They're called different things. I'm called an innovation advisor. I can spend some of my time on this stuff. Business development managers, TT, technology transfer officers. Oxford has industrial partnership teams that work very much as a group, and it has a central team that helps introduce you to them, placement officers, etc. So the intermediaries around will be able to help you with this process. So you kind of not totally go it alone, but you do have to do a fair amount of homework yourself. I said I'd cover some pitfalls. I'll do that quickly before, and this is a personal perspective, and Charles, you might want to think about, just give me one pitfall in a minute that you think is the key deal breaker. But what I see is people make approaches before they've done some homework, so they're almost like doomed to fail because they're knocking on the wrong door, or perhaps even knocking at the wrong time, because you've got to remember that everybody's working to slightly different timescales and has different priorities at different times. I think collaborations quite often struggle when the objectives are a bit woolly. Most projects suffer actually when objectives are a bit woolly, because they get exposed later on. You know, we weren't really sure what we wanted to get out of this. So get help from people like me to frame your objectives more clearly. Now you can start a conversation with having reasonably broad objectives and see whether or not there is some commonality between your interests. That's okay, but pretty soon, if this collaboration is going to work, you'll have to start being quite a lot more specific. Otherwise, one or more of the parties are going to get disappointed. Then downstream, we see problems where people haven't properly considered intellectual property, have different views on confidentiality, different timescales and horizons. So as you can see, a lot of this comes down to preparation and planning, and then to other factors like poor communication between parties. So as Charles, I think, quite correctly pointed out, these partnerships can be challenging, but can really work, and it's quite often the normal things which will help them to work more effectively. It's not rocket science, as they say, and it's also not a black art. It's just good business and communication sense. So before I go to Charles, did you have a thought about what was your your key deal breakers? What goes wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is essentially it's a service industry, and the service industries are so think about it this way. You know a well-known group of lawyers, for instance, or patent attorneys, some big firm. Well, the one individual you speak to is not necessarily representative of the whole firm. It's representative of their relationship with you. That is because it's a service industry. When you buy an iPad, you expect it to be the same as another iPad and another iPad, but that's not true when you're dealing with people. And so there will be something to do with personality, yours and theirs, and whether they mix and match together. And I know that shouldn't be the case, but it is, because because technology is delivered by people. So that can be a bit of a challenge. If you don't happen to get on with the person you've made contact with, then that can be a challenge. Actually, they're often very busy people, and I'd say again, if you have a need which intrigues them, then everybody can find time. Yes,
Yeah.
and they will. And you know, I had a problem which was intriguing to James Broughton when I went along for Yasser, and we got on. You know, it takes time to develop that relationship, but we got on famously. But had that not happened, I would have had to have gone somewhere else.
I like your analogy there, Charles, about this. You know, this is a service industry, and a service. It's a good way to think about it, because it is very much, you know, I was talking earlier on about the complexity of the ecosystem. It's not a homogeneous product by any means. So thank you for that. That's great. Okay, last slide from me is, what do you do next? And I'm suggesting, if you're interested in a collaboration, then I'd encourage you, and I've worked with a few clients, including one that's on the call today, so I might ask Darren to talk to us in a minute. But prepare an initial collaboration proposal and share that with me. So just get down on paper, and I'm talking about 1 or 2 sheets of paper, what you think you'd be liking to achieve, and what kind of expertise or help you need. Where do you think, not where physically, but what is the domain in which you think that help is going to be coming from? What I would then do is work with you to put that into a shape which I think we could then share with some of these intermediaries that I've talked about. Because what we'd like to do is help you set up and establish these early exploratory conversations. And I think then you can determine quite quickly, and the other parties can determine whether or not it's worth having subsequent discussions. In the background, you can do some research around, you know, who's got the same interests as you, who might be interested in, you know, as Charles said, you know, who's going to be intrigued by what it is you've got to offer. And then we can help, as Charles said as well, with drafting agreements. There are model agreements which are IP related, or just collaborative agreements, which we can look at when you get to that stage of forming some sort of slightly more formal collaboration. Not all collaborations, if you have a student project, for example, it'll be a template agreement between you, the institution, and the student, but some of the more complex ones will require a little bit of work. So there's my suggestions about where you start. And what I'd like to move on to now is a couple of questions.